He was the strongest demon king in history, but after causing too much damage and falling into debt, he's fired by the elders and forced to earn money in the human world. The story begins as we learn about the fight between the light and dark continents, which has been going on for hundreds of years. The humans on the light continent launched countless crusades to eliminate the dark clan, but they couldn't break through the halls guarded by the 7 demon kings. The most powerful among them is the monarch of the first hall named Merlin, and we see him writing his weekly report, but he can't focus because the battle is right outside his palace. His sister Lilith uses her charm magic to make the humans fight each other, but one of the knights suddenly attacks her and sends her crashing to the ground. The humans stop fighting each other, and the knight introduces herself as Alice, the 233rd hero of the kingdom. Lilith realizes her magic didn't work on her because she's a girl, and she starts teasing her, telling her she's cute. Alice pushes her back and rushes to attack her, but Lilith kicks her away. She struggles to land a hit, and Lilith mocks her for being weak, so Alice decides to show her true powers. Lilith attacks her, but she's shocked as her whip made from dragon tendons breaks upon touching Alice's sword. She notes that the holy sword light anthem can't be touched by dark creatures like her, and she attacks Lilith with her magic. She manages to block it, but Alice suddenly rushes in and captures her. The soldiers start cheering for Alice, but Merlin hears the noise and wonders what's happening outside. Alice asks her master Sage to order her to attack the Demon King's palace, but he turns down her request and summons a giant monster whale. He calls it the ultimate weapon of humanity, since it can destroy everything with a single blow. Alice thinks they should only eliminate the Demon King, but he believes all demons deserve to die, so he wants to wipe them out. He knows how evil the Demon King is, because he's the only person who ever survived after facing him. He launches his ultimate attack to obliterate the demons, but Merlin suddenly arrives to protect them and accidentally lands on Alice. Lilith hugs him, telling him they bullied her, while Alice tells him to watch his step while he's landing. He wonders who she is, so Lilith tells him she's a useless hero, but he knows that Lilith lost to her, so she explains that she just got careless. Alice wishes to fight him, but he sends her flying with just a flick of his finger. Sage calls him his nemesis, but Merlin doesn't even remember him, so he mentions that he was the only person to ever survive after fighting against him. Merlin finally remembers him begging for his life, and notes that he let Sage escape because he promised to sacrifice his men to him. Everyone's shocked hearing this, but Sage explains that it isn't true, saying he's there for humanity's glory and justice. He draws out the magical energy from all his soldiers and fires a powerful energy beam, but Merlin uses his sword to deliver a devastating attack, which kills the monster in an instant. Sage begs for forgiveness and blames Alice for the attack, but they suddenly hear a bell, which freaks Merlin out as he realizes that the weekly meeting has started. He runs toward his palace, but Alice stops him, so he mentions that even though she's too weak for him, he'll use his dark blade vortex because she came all the way to fight him. He unleashes a destructive sword attack, and Alice tries to block it with her barrier, but she gets overwhelmed, and it cuts through the ground. At the meeting, they're all disappointed at Merlin because he has the worst performance out of all the Demon Kings. He mentions that he defeated the most crusades and destroyed millions of humans, but they tell him he isn't making money for the palace. They explain that every time he goes fighting, he causes serious damage to the Land of Darkness, so his total debt has reached 66 trillion yen, and they ask him to pay it immediately. Merlin tries to sneak out of the palace, but Lilith thinks he's playing hide and seek. He tells her the demon realm is too small for him, so it's time for him to explore the outside world, thinking his absence will make everyone realize how important he is. She wonders if he was fired, but he tells her it was totally his own decision, and the elders tried to stop him. He mentions that he's leaving because of his curse, which shrinks his heart if he doesn't fight strong opponents, so he must find them in the Kingdom of Light. But she thinks he has no skill other than being a demon king, so he won't survive in the outside world. She wishes to accompany him, but he notes that he must pay 66 trillion for all the damages he caused if he stays there. So she quickly jumps back and wishes him luck in earning enough to pay back his debt. As he leaves, she thinks that even though he's the strongest demon king, he's still an idiot who will return after he fails in the outside world. So she thinks he'll come back crying, but hopes the experience will help him grow as a person. Meanwhile, Alice notes that if it weren't for her mithril armor and light anthem, she wouldn't have survived. But she realizes that Lilith is approaching, so she plays dead, and Lilith thinks it's a miracle that her body is still intact. But she doesn't want to let her beautiful face turn to dust, so she decides to take her to the palace and keep her as a collectible. She tries to pick her up, but she's too heavy, so she decides to just take her head, but Alice moves to dodge the attack. Lilith wants to have a rematch, but Alice knows she's in no condition to fight, so she tries to escape, and Lilith orders her wolves to chase her. Meanwhile, Merlin reaches the sea, which the humans cross to reach the demon realm, and he realizes he used too much force with the blade strike earlier because it damaged all the ships. He knows that demons can't swim, so he thinks he has no choice but to return, but a small boat suddenly floats towards him, and he decides to row himself across the sea. Meanwhile, Alice continues to run from the wolves, and she remembers how her master told her she isn't ready to face the demons. But she didn't want to become like her master, who did nothing but stay on the snowy mountain, so she insisted on going on an adventure. She starts crying as she realizes that the outside world is scary, and she thinks she needs to work on her skills when she gets back. She takes out one of the wolves and feels relieved because only one elite tier beast is left, but it suddenly transforms into its final form, which freaks her out. She struggles to defend herself and thinks she won't survive, but Merlin suddenly stops the wolf. He thinks she would make the perfect slave, so he tells the wolf named Fatty to tell Lilith that Alice belongs to him, which freaks her out. He tells her he saved her life, so she must serve as his slave to return the favor. He carries her to the boat, and she tries to resist, but she's no match for him, and he tells her to start rowing. Alice dreams about defeating Merlin, and she's about to marry a prince, but Merlin wakes her up, telling her to get to work. She thinks about getting her revenge one day, and as she gets lost in her thoughts, she starts rowing aggressively. She notices him standing firm despite the strong currents, but she soon realizes he's taking support from a wooden board. After some time, she smells the delicious food he's cooking, so she gets distracted. But he mentions that she's a useless hero, which upsets her, so she stops rowing, telling him they'll simply drift to death. He tells her she'll be rewarded if she works well, and even though she's against having that food, she isn't able to resist it. She apologizes to her master, saying a demon king shouldn't be able to cook such delicious food, so it's against the laws of nature. The sharks are attracted to the smell of food, and she tells him to stop roasting, but he ignores them, so she tells him the sea is home to more dangerous creatures. He points towards her back, and she's scared seeing a shark up close, but he sends it back with his conqueror's hockey. He thinks he's the most dangerous creature in the sea, but she notes that she was talking about the sea monster, which is the most terrifying predator in the sea. She reveals that even their army had to smear the holy dragon's poop on their ships, just to avoid its attack, and he realizes that it's the reason why the army smells so weird. But she notes that the holy dragon's poop is a precious treasure, because the holy dragon disappeared, so its poop is more precious than gold. She thinks he must have never heard about the holy dragon, but he takes out a contract crystal used for binding demonic beasts. He opens a portal, through which he contacts Bucky, thinking he no longer needs to leave, because he can earn the extra money by selling its poop. Alice can't believe the holy dragon turned into a pet, so he explains that he defeated it and made it his pet. But she's still in shock, because the holy dragon is supposed to be the strongest being in the world. He thinks Bucky will find him through the crystal and take him back to the palace, but it suddenly slips out of his hand and falls into the sea. Merlin tells Alice to continue working, but he notices that all the fish around them have suddenly disappeared, so he thinks a dangerous predator must be nearby. The sea monster appears before them, and Alice asks him to chase it away, but he mentions that he can't swim. She wonders why he's acting so strong when he can't even swim, so she realizes that she must deal with it herself. She jumps to attack it, but her sword can't pierce through its skin, and she loses all hope. Merlin tells the monster to become his new slave and carry him across the sea, but it rejects his offer and shoots water at him. So he uses his sword to attack it, killing it in an instant, and Alice can't believe how powerful he is. They finally reach the shore, and Merlin notes that they only made it because he's such a good leader. He thinks Alice is a useless slave because she lacks strength and brains, so he decides to part ways with her. But before he leaves, he tells her to take off her armor because he wants to earn money by selling it. Alice appears in the court, where she's held responsible for the death of her fellow soldiers because she wasn't strong enough to defeat Merlin. She's stripped of her status as a hero and ordered to pay 50 million gold since she lost the precious mithril armor. After a year, we see Alice fighting against pirates, but they think she's too weak to defeat them. She frees the girl they kidnapped and tells her to stop worrying because she'll engage them until backup arrives. She shoots ice to freeze the captain's feet, but as she tries to finish him off, she's blocked by another pirate who pushes her back. She tells them they won't be able to lay a hand on the girl as long as she's alive, but they just laugh at her. They explain that she's just an elite tier hero while they're at the holy tier, so she can't do anything to them. They prepare to attack her, but Merlin suddenly lands on top of them. He mentions that he couldn't wait for them to complete their show since his curse would have activated. They think he's weak because they can't sense his magic, so they decide to fight him. He uses his sword to defeat them, but his attack creates a massive explosion, which destroys their ship, as well as the reinforcement ships sent to rescue the mayor's daughter. Alice can't see his face, so she considers him her hero and starts praising him, but he leaves before she can learn about his identity. After that, a reporter named Bella mentions that the Queen considers Merlin a wanted criminal. She reveals that no one knows his real name and they've given him the title of Nightblade, but Alice refuses to accept it since she considers him as the real hero. She's irritated that the TV is still showing the interview, and she's happy that she was able to collect 10,000 gold, but she realizes that she still has a long way to go before she can clear her debt. She recalls how Merlin ruined her life and hits the table out of frustration, but she accidentally spills water on her next mission contract. She notices that the wanted criminal looks like Merlin, but she thinks that a demon king couldn't be a freeloader. She realizes she's late for her carriage, but she starts hugging her poster of Nightblade, asking him to bless her and curse the demon king. Meanwhile, Merlin sees his wanted poster, but he isn't happy that he only has a bounty of 5,000 gold. He realizes he was careless because he wasted all the money he got from selling the armor, but he thinks everyone should be honored if he dines at their place instead of calling him a freeloader. He finally sees a village, but two bandits try to rob him, telling him they'll be punished if they don't take something to their master. They ask him to hand over his sword, but he warns them that they'll die the moment he takes it out. The bandits laugh at him, and one of them uses his knife to instantly peel off an apple, asking Merlin if he's afraid. But Merlin uses his sword to cut him into pieces, and he takes the apple, while the second bandit runs away. He turns into a goblin, so Merlin realizes that they used transformation magic to look like bandits. The goblin tells the king that a human killed his companion, but it makes him happy. We learn that they disguised themselves as bandits so that they could provoke the humans to break the peace treaty, and the king orders his subjects to attack a human village. Merlin sends a letter to Lilith, telling her he's living a luxurious life and that everyone loves him. So he won't return to the Demon King's palace unless the old men apologize to him, but she knows he's just bluffing. He tries to leave a hotel without paying, and the owner recognizes him as the infamous freeloader who has been causing trouble in the south. He asks everyone to help him catch Merlin, but he manages to escape. He notes that he didn't want to cause trouble, but a boy named Henry suddenly appears before him. He instinctively holds his sword, so Henry wonders if he's performing, telling Merlin he'll reward him if he puts on a good show. But Merlin can't take out his sword, because it would kill Henry and destroy the village. So he just tries to trick him, but Henry gets angry and calls him a useless bum. So Merlin becomes angry and throws away Henry's ice cream, making him cry. Alice also arrives in the village, and the adventurers tell her it's an honor to travel with a hero, but she mentions that she no longer has that title, so they wonder what happened. As she's about to explain, a man starts shouting about a new book, which is about the secret romance between the Demon King and the female hero. She becomes embarrassed because she thinks it's about her adventure with Merlin, and the man notes that millions of copies have been sold, so she falls into despair. The adventurers discuss how they will deal with the goblins, but seeing them talk about their marriage scares her, because she thinks they'll die during the mission. The girl named Priest wishes her luck on her mission, and she notes that they don't mind the cross-species romance of Alice and the Demon King. She looks at the wanted poster and wonders why a freeloader has a huge bounty on his head, but she thinks it will be an easy job. Merlin goes to a nearby inn and enjoys delicious food, but the owner catches him when he tries to sneak out. She notes that the restroom is in the opposite direction, so he mentions that he's looking for a job, but she asks him if he has any skills relevant to the inn. He shows his dancing and singing skills, which impresses everyone, and she decides to hire him, telling him his base pay is 1 gold, and he also gets a 15% commission on drink sales. He wonders how she can afford such good pay, so she tells him they run 2 shifts. Everything's normal during the day shift, but at night, they serve plenty of female customers, so he needs to make the environment lively. She introduces herself as Martha, and he comes up with the nickname Daisy for his night shift. She mentions that she'll deduct the cost of his meal from his first salary, and she introduces him to her son Henry, who calls him a freeloader, but she hits him for being rude. She tells him to show Merlin the guest room, and on their way, Merlin tries to bribe him so that he won't tell her about their first encounter. He offers to teach Henry his blade strike so that he can fight holy tier opponents, but he doesn't trust Merlin. He notes that only a talented person like the Nightblade can defeat a holy tier opponent, so Merlin tells him he's the Nightblade, but Henry refuses to believe him. Meanwhile, the adventurers struggle to defeat the goblins because they weren't expecting to fight an entire army of them. They realize they have no other option, so they try to escape, but they get captured by the goblin chancellor named Gia. Merlin starts working at the inn, and he focuses entirely on the female customers to win their hearts, but the male customers are insecure because of him. Martha is pleased with his performance because he increased their sales, and she believes he must have excelled in his previous jobs as well. She thinks his nickname Daisy might look odd in the newspaper, but he fears it will lead to more embarrassment, so he tells her they don't need ads. Henry interrupts them, saying he's just a freeloader who feeds off women's money, and tells him to stay away from his mother. Alice can't find her target, but she suddenly hears Henry hitting the tree, and realizes he's angry at a handsome freeloader, so she shows him the poster. He notes that it doesn't look like the freeloader he knows, who has been conning women at their tavern to increase their revenue. She thinks he's just a workaholic, but several men suddenly approach her and offer her a reward if she takes care of Merlin, since their women are trapped by his charm. Alice goes to the inn, where she's surprised to see a large number of women, since it's just a small town. She sees Merlin and realizes he's the freeloader from her poster, so she decides to catch him. But she recalls that according to the reports, he always runs away, so she tries to get close to him first. She accidentally enters the stage, and he thinks she also wants to be a part of his performance. But they soon learn of each other's true identity, so she tries to kill him, but he dodges all of her attacks. She starts crying, telling him she's been living a miserable life after he left her, so the ladies think he's a terrible person for abandoning her. After that, Alice asks Merlin to return her treasure, but he reveals that he has already sold it. She mentions that he ruined her life, so she'll arrest him if he doesn't return the armor, but he reminds her she's no match for him. She realizes that she must live with her debt of 50 million gold, which surprises him, because he only has a debt of a few thousand coins after freeloading for a year. She explains her situation to him, telling him she had to get a job in the Adventurers Guild, and fight holy tier opponents to pay off her debt. But he gets excited, asking her how he can become an adventurer, so she tells him he'll need a referral. He asks her for her referral, because he always wanted to become an adventurer, but she turns him down. Meanwhile, Henry walks around the city, but the guards tell him to go home, because Martha will be upset. He mentions that he doesn't want to see the freeloader, and the adventurer who left to defeat the goblins appears. He asks the guards to open the gates, but they tell him they aren't allowed to open it at night. He notes that his friends are dead, and he's heavily wounded, so they open the gate. But it turns out to be a trap, and the goblins rush into the village. He asks Gia to free his fiancée as part of their agreement, but she explains that he has no right to negotiate with her, because he's just a slave. Alice wonders why the Demon King wants to become an adventurer, and she's upset that she can no longer get her reward, because no one can capture him. The goblins attack the inn, but Merlin realizes they aren't customers, so he kicks them out, which impresses the ladies. Martha worries for her son, so she rushes out to find him, and leaves the tavern under his care. As more goblins appear, he quickly takes care of them, and continues working as if nothing happened. He realizes that he won't get paid if anything happens to Martha, so he goes off to find her, while she asks everyone if they've seen Henry. A man tells her he saw him near the gate, and warns her that there are goblins everywhere, but she goes looking for him anyway. She calls out his name, which draws the monster's attention, and they take her away. Henry realizes she's in trouble, so he tries to help her, but he's so scared that he can't move. Meanwhile, Merlin walks around the village and thinks it's as chaotic as the Dark Realm. He runs into goblins and wants to avoid fighting them since they're so weak that they can't help him with his curse. But they still attack him, so he cuts them into pieces. Alice sees him and thinks he's working with the goblins, but he explains that he'll never team up with such low-ranked creatures. She notes that if he isn't with them, he should help her defeat them, but he explains that he doesn't care because he isn't a resident of the village. She reminds him that he wants to join the guild and tells him adventurers must protect the village, but he doesn't want to do it unless she pays him. She notes that she doesn't have money, so he tells her to step aside because he needs to find Martha. Alice thinks she can save the village alone, and she uses her ice magic to freeze the goblins. Gia observes her and thinks Alice won't be able to stop her if she lands a surprise attack, but Alice shocks her with a strong kick. She tells Gia to leave the village, but she mentions that despite being an elite tier, Alice can't defeat all of them. Gia orders the goblins to capture her, but a boy suddenly collapses before her and tells her about Merlin. She uses her magic to see how the goblins were killed and realizes that her army is no match for Merlin, so she orders them to retreat. The villagers look for their family, while a man named Johnson tries to advertise his services as a personal guard. They all ask him to save their loved ones, but he thinks they're already dead, so he tells them to focus on the future instead. Alice arrives with the adventurer who asked the guards to open the gates, and he tells them the goblins took their loved ones to their cave. One of the soldiers recognizes him and calls him a traitor, but Alice defends him, saying his fiancée and comrades were captured, so he was forced to work with the goblins. Johnson asks her who she is, so she introduces herself as the 233rd hero, and everyone starts talking about her. Johnson tries to turn them against her, so she kicks him away and decides to attack the cave alone. Henry decides to join her, thinking the villagers are all cowards, but he accidentally trips over a goblin and becomes scared as he sees the bodies. He goes to take his father's sword so that he can use it to save his mother. The unconscious goblins suddenly wake up, and he tries to attack them, but they easily defeat him. They're about to finish him off, but Merlin arrives to save him and tells them they're making him angry because they're the reason why he needs to work overtime. Henry tries to leave with the sword, and Merlin tells him to stay home, but he notes that he needs to save his mother. Merlin thinks he's always causing trouble, but he remembers the time he had to fight to save his sister, and decides to help Henry. He notes that it will be the first time he lifts his sword for a human, but he doesn't know where the goblin's cave is. He hears a group of humans planning to rescue their loved ones in the goblin's lair, so he decides to join them. He volunteers to be their leader, telling them he's a strong warrior, but they think he isn't fit to lead them. Henry tries to tell them he's a capable fighter, but he doesn't want to explain himself, so he decides to appoint Johnson as their leader instead. They're glad that he'll lead the rescue because they think he's a reliable warrior, but he's too scared to face the goblins. Alice sneaks into the cave by distracting the goblins, while Gia tells the Goblin King about their raid. He praises her for capturing humans, but she tells him she encountered 2 strong fighters in the village. She claims that she could have defeated them, but she led them to the cave instead, so that he could enjoy watching them suffer. They finally arrive outside the goblin's cave, and Johnson starts shivering in fear, while Henry rushes to fight the goblins, but Merlin stops him because he knows it's a trap. Gia activates her fire barrier and tells them to surrender if they want to live. Merlin walks through it, which worries Henry, but he notes that the heat is nothing compared to the magma under his house. Gia notes that even holy tier warriors can't break through it, so the humans don't stand a chance, but Merlin suddenly appears behind her, telling her he walked right through it. She wonders who he is, but he can't reveal his true identity, so he tells her he's Daisy, and he manages to charm all the goblins. He grabs her hand and asks her to just hand over Martha, but she refuses and tries to burn him with her magic. But he easily stops her flames, so she realizes that he's been hiding his true powers. She uses her ultimate move to surround him with her flames, but he sneezes and sends all the goblins flying. She wonders if he's a monster, but he just flicks her, which sends her crashing into the mountain. The fire disappears, and Johnson can't believe Merlin was able to defeat Gia because she's an elite tier mage, and as he enters the cave, they notice that his silhouette is similar to that of the Nightblade. Meanwhile, Alice frees the prisoners, but she's spotted by goblins, so she tells Priest to lead everyone out of the cave while she handles them. She quickly defeats them, but accidentally enters the king's hall, where she sees him waiting for her. He reveals that Gia told him she'll deal with one of the attackers, and she'll send the other one to him, since he hasn't fought a strong opponent in ages. She realizes he's a holy tier fighter, and thinks he focuses on brute strength, but he surprises her with his speed, and shatters her ice shield. Merlin tries to find Martha, but he gets lost in the cave, because there are multiple paths. The Goblin King tries to grab Alice, but she jumps back and cuts his arm, which impresses him, because he knows that his previous hit broke her bones. He thinks she's just an ant compared to him, but she mentions that her master taught her that underestimating an opponent can be fatal. He manages to capture her, but she uses her giant ice sword to break free. She lands a combination attack, and thinks it's over, but he reveals that he was just pretending to be dead, since he likes to see his opponents fall into despair. He heals his wounds, and transforms his body before punching her away. Meanwhile, Priest and the others try to escape from the cave, but they soon find a figure in front of them, so they think they're surrounded by goblins. But it turns out to be Merlin, who's happy to see Martha, and he asks her to give him a bonus for working overtime. She grabs his arm and runs, because they don't have much time, but he stops and instantly takes out the goblins chasing after them. She asks him to save Alice, since she helped them escape, but he wonders if he should help her or leave her. Martha promises to triple his salary if he saves her, so he decides to do it. Priest tells him to be careful and advises him against entering a hall filled with gold coins, because the Goblin King is a holy tier opponent. He storms off, thinking he'll get rich after defeating a powerful enemy, but they think he's just worried about Alice. He knocks out several goblins on his way to the king's hall, and blasts through the entrance, but he ignores the king and starts looking at all the gold. He cuts off the goblin's arm and grabs Alice, but he wonders if Martha will reduce his bonus, since Alice is injured. She asks him about the others, so he tells her they're safe, and that he'll get her out of there after he defeats the Goblin King. The Goblin King pretends to be hurt, and he suddenly regenerates his lost arm, but Merlin shows no reaction, so he wonders what's wrong with him. Merlin notes that he knows a troublemaker with a similar sense of humor, but she's much prettier than him. The Goblin King realizes he's strong, so he decides to go all out, and begins to attack him from all directions, but Merlin easily blocks all of his attacks. The Goblin King asks for his name, but Merlin thinks he doesn't deserve to know it, so he just tells him he's called Daisy. The Goblin King prepares to use his ultimate technique, so Merlin becomes excited. He offers to make Merlin his chancellor if he swears loyalty to him, but he laughs at his courage to make such an offer, telling him to go all out. So he uses his ultimate goblin's hammer skill, but Merlin easily blocks it, and Alice sees him from behind, realizing he's the Nightblade. He takes out his sword, and the Goblin King recognizes it as the legendary sword Vortex, which only the Demon King of Pride can draw. Merlin defeats him with a single blow, but he forgets to control his attack, so the entire cave starts collapsing. He wonders if he should save Alice or grab the treasure, and his conscience reminds him that she can refer him to the guild, so he ends up deciding to save her. He creates an opening to leave the cave, and everyone's glad they made it out alive. Henry considers him a hero, and thanks him for saving everyone, but he starts crying over the lost treasure, while Martha thinks he's just worried about Alice. Merlin sees that Alice is badly injured, but he needs her to recommend him to the guild, so he decides to heal her. He takes off her clothes, but Martha enters, and thinks they're about to get intimate, so she quickly rushes out with Henry, telling them to continue. He covers Alice with his saliva, since it has a healing effect on the opposite gender, and as she begins to heal, she starts dreaming, and he realizes it's because of the saliva, so he thinks he won't be able to enjoy a peaceful night. Alice wakes up the next morning, and everyone rushes to check on her. She doesn't remember what happened after she was defeated by the Goblin King, so Priest tells her she should thank Merlin, because he was the one who saved her. She thinks they should reconcile since they're old friends, but Alice tells her they're rivals. Everyone thanks Alice for saving them earlier, but she mentions that it's part of her job. Bella interviews Johnson, who brags about how he led the villagers to fight the goblins, but he becomes nervous when he sees Merlin. She asks him about the goblin invasion, but Merlin thinks it was just a few goblins, so she wonders if it was just a minor conflict exaggerated by the villagers. Martha tells him Alice is looking for him, and he thinks she wants to thank him, but when he goes to her room, she suddenly attacks him. She thinks he took advantage of her because he took off her clothes, and the priest next door heard weird sounds throughout the night. but he explains that it was because of his saliva, which healed her wounds and made her dream of him. She finally understands the situation and thanks him for saving her, but he mentions that he lost all of the treasure because of her, so she reminds him that it was all stolen. He asks for her help to become an adventurer, so she agrees to refer him, but she mentions that it would make them even. Martha and the others give them farewell gifts, and Henry tells Merlin he wants to become his student in the future. Martha teases Merlin and Alice about getting married, but Alice insists that they aren't a couple. Meanwhile, the goblins realize their king is dead, and think they should migrate to the south, so that Daisy will never reach them. A woman suddenly appears before them, and she mentions that she has the third key to the Legion of Hell, but she notes that she must kill all of them, because she doesn't want anyone to know about it. Merlin and Alice reach the guild, and he notes that the building is small, but he's excited to be an adventurer. He sees the notice board with the available contracts, and asks Alice if she's an adventurer or a part-time worker, because they're mostly ordinary jobs. The receptionist notices them, and she wonders if Alice came for another mission. She knows she can't introduce him with his real name, so she mentions that he's Daisy, which makes the receptionist wonder if he's her boyfriend. So she quickly shows the wanted poster, and notes that she came to collect the reward. He's shocked hearing this, but she tells him a criminal can't become an adventurer, so he must pay his debt first. The receptionist named Lou tells her that even though it follows the rules, she'll only get 10% of her actual reward. Lou deducts the money she owes the guild, and gives her 50 gold coins, which makes her sad, but Merlin tries to steal them, saying he was the one who turned himself in. She tells him she lost thousands of gold because of him, so he reminds her of how he saved her life multiple times. Lou notes that they should test his level, but Merlin thinks they shouldn't waste time, telling her to give him the highest title. A man named Arnold arrives, and he thinks Alice is dating Merlin, which makes him sad, because she rejected his proposal. She tells him she isn't dating Merlin, but he still takes out his sword, and challenges Merlin to a duel, telling him the winner can date her. She yells at them to stop, but Arnold still rushes in and attacks Merlin, who sends him flying into the ceiling. Another adventurer named Hobbs tells Alice that her boyfriend is just as strong as her, and Merlin thinks he's mocking him. But she notes that it's a compliment, because their guild only has a few strong adventurers. Merlin mentions that he'll help them raise the overall level of the guild, but a man named Claude suddenly arrives, and everyone falls silent. He checks his power, and the orb reveals that he's a saint-level fighter. Lou tells him he passed the test, and everyone's shocked because he's as powerful as the guild master. Merlin thinks he'll shock everyone with his results, and that they'll worship him after he takes the test. But the device fails to measure his power, so Lou tells him he can't become an adventurer. Alice wonders if he's hiding his strength, but he isn't sure what's happening. She offers to prove that he's strong enough to become an adventurer, but Lou tells her she can't break the rules. He notes that a highly skilled warrior like him is rare, and even the Devil's Messenger asked him to lead the Hell's Legion, but he turned down the offer. Everyone starts laughing at him, but he offers to fight the strongest person in the guild to prove his strength. The guild master arrives, saying he can't ignore his challenge, and he takes him to a hall. Merlin asks him if he wants to give up, thinking it will help him keep his reputation, but the guild master thinks he's arrogant, telling him he has already defeated countless people who challenged him. He explains that Merlin doesn't need to defeat him, because he'll allow him to become an adventurer if he shows potential, but he notices that Merlin isn't even listening. The old man tells him to go all out, so Merlin uses his blade strike, which shocks him and damages everything around them. The adventurers think their master went too far, thinking Merlin must be scared to death, but he surprisingly returns unscathed. The guild master allows him to join the guild, and he's so scared that he wets his pants. Merlin comes up with a plan to get rich as an adventurer, and he tells Alice he'll give her a 10% share from the mission rewards, but she doesn't want to work with him. Merlin thinks he doesn't need Alice, but he soon runs out of money, and since he has nowhere else to go, he sneaks into her house. She catches him, and thinks he was spying on her, but he mentions that she has nothing worth spying on. He tells her it's hard living alone, so he'll stay with her, and only charge her 1,000 gold for his protection. But she kicks him out, so he starts creating a commotion, which grabs everyone's attention, and they think Alice kicked out her boyfriend. She realizes he'll ruin her reputation, so she takes him inside, and he offers to protect her for free if she lets him stay. She tries to hit him, but he easily evades her attacks and enters her room. He lies on her bed, and when she tries to remove him, he tells her it's too small for both of them. So he wraps her in the blanket and makes her fall asleep. The next morning, Alice goes to the guild, but she's tired from sleeping on the floor. Merlin arrives, and he asks her why she didn't wake him up, so everyone starts gossiping that they're living together. Arnold also appears, and he notes that his duel with Merlin wasn't fair, so they should have a best of 3. But instead of fighting, they should see who can complete an A-rank mission. Merlin notes that even though he isn't interested in winning her over, he can't ignore a commission since he's an adventurer. He tells Lou he wishes to take the commission, but she tells him he can't accept the mission without a mentor because his level is too low. So he tells Alice to join him, but Arnold also asks her to join his team instead, telling her he already hired Claude to be a part of his team. Merlin thinks he's the ideal choice, but she decides to join Arnold's team. Everyone feels bad for Merlin because she abandoned him for the Duke's son, but he sees Hobbs and tricks him into forming a team. After that, Hobbs wakes up in a carriage and wonders where they are, so Merlin tells him about the mission, but he gets scared because he's just a mage and Merlin is a rookie. He tells Hobbs to stop worrying because he'll take care of everything, but Hobbs suddenly sees the Knights of the Duke of Roses. But Merlin doesn't know them, so Hobbs mentions that they have a higher status than Arnold's father. The captain named Carl asks for directions, so Hobbs tells him he needs to cross the mountain, but they'll need to walk because their carriage can't go there. Carl becomes angry, thinking he wants the Duke's daughter Cecilia to walk on such a muddy path, so Merlin wonders if she's a cripple. Carl tries to whip him, but Merlin grabs onto it and pulls him off his horse. Hobbs tells him to calm down and end the fight by apologizing, but he thinks Carl should be the one to apologize. They suddenly see a stampede of burning rhinos approaching, so Carl orders his soldiers to protect the carriage. Merlin thinks the rhinos are running away from something, and one of them is about to crash into Carl, but Merlin suddenly lifts it with a single finger. He slams it to the ground, and the rhinos realize they're no match for him, and they all run away. Carl can't believe it, because he knows that rhinos never stop charging ahead, and Hobbs asks Merlin what happened. So he explains that demon beasts retreat when they see someone with overwhelming power, but Carl thinks he must have just used a beast-repelling powder. Cecilia comes out of the carriage, and she realizes Merlin is only an iron-ranked adventurer, but she knows that he's strong, so she offers to hire him for 10,000 gold. She tells him it's a high reward for an iron adventurer, telling him he won't find a better offer given his current rank. Hobbs agrees to work for her, but she notes that he isn't even worth 5 gold, and he tells Merlin to accept the offer because it's twice as much as the reward of their mission. But he notes that she doesn't understand how much he's worth, telling her he'll agree to work for her if she pays him 66 trillion. So she leaves with her men, and he notes that he's willing to negotiate, but Carl can't believe how rude he is. She orders her men to increase their pace and explains that they must reach the crypt quickly because she knows that Merlin is headed in that direction. We learn that her goal is to impress her father by resolving the crisis, and she thinks Arnold is a threat because he might deal with the problem before they get there. We see Alice in Arnold's carriage, and he thinks she'll belong to him because they can't lose with Claude on their team. But she notes that she doesn't care about his bet with Merlin, telling him she likes powerful warriors like Nightblade. Claude wonders how skilled he is, so Alice mentions that he defeated the Holy Tier pirate brothers, but Claude thinks he's nothing special. She asks him who he thinks is the strongest, so he tells her about the 4 heroes of the previous empire. The first one is the dragon assassin Corona, who killed 7 Holy Tiers in one night, and Claude mentions the twin sword saints Zoe and Joey, who took down the legendary Giant King. The last one is the storm warrior Bernard, who's known as the strongest fighter of the previous empire, and he's famous for defeating a giant Holy Tier dragon. Claude thinks they deserve to be called the strongest, and he thinks Nightblade is nothing compared to them, so Alice becomes upset. But their carriage suddenly stops as the burning rhinos charge towards them. Alice prepares to take them on, but Claude instantly destroys all of them, and Arnold thinks he almost scared them off. But he explains that it's impossible because they aren't afraid of anything, saying the only way to stop them is to slaughter them. We see Merlin drinking with girls, and they think he's amazing, but Alice suddenly arrives, telling him to take the mission seriously. They think she's his girlfriend, so they walk away, and he tells her to mind her own business, reminding her that they aren't on the same team. Arnold notes that he won't lose, because he has Claude on his team, but Merlin reveals that he only cares about the 5,000 gold reward. Arnold thinks Alice will eventually fall in love with him, but she walks away, and he tells Merlin that the tomb of the former kingdom's chancellor is in the forest. We learn that grave robbers woke him up, so he's now an undead mage, who summons wraiths to cause trouble. Arnold notes that whoever takes him down will be the biggest hero, but he knows that the chancellor has holy tear power, so he thinks Merlin doesn't stand a chance. We see Alice in the woods, and she sees Claude, so she decides to follow him. A portal opens before him, and he starts talking to his master, who calls him Bernard, so she realizes that he's one of the heroes of the previous empire. She tries to leave, but he hears her make a sound, so she realizes she's in trouble. As he approaches her, she pretends that she just wandered off while she was drunk, telling him to drink with the others. But he refuses to go with her, and she's glad that she was able to fool him, thinking she can hear him talk to his master, because she used an eavesdropping spell on him. He continues to talk to his master, and notes that Chancellor Ian's spirit has been disturbed, so the undead have taken over the area. He explains that he disguised himself as an adventurer, so that nobody would discover his plan, and his master notes that Ian transformed himself into a lich before the empire fell. We learn that 400 years have passed since then, and the master notes that Ian's magic is formidable, but Bernard promises to take care of him so that they can restore the empire. He rushes to the tomb, and Alice thinks she needs to do something, but she knows that she's no match for him, so she thinks about asking for Merlin's help. But she knows that he'll mock her if she depends on him, so she decides to do everything alone. We see Cecilia approaching the tomb with her men, and she tells them there's no time to rest, because they can't let anyone else take the credit. Bernard watches them from a distance, and he thinks they're doomed, because he knows that Ian's maze is dangerous. Alice realizes that she might get lost in the maze, so she decides to stay close to Bernard. The next day, we see Arnold looking for Alice, and he checks Merlin's tent, wondering if she spent the night with him. He pulls off Merlin's blanket, and he's glad that she isn't there, but Merlin hits him for waking him up. Arnold explains that he can't find Alice, and he adds that Claude is also missing, so Hobbs reveals that they both left the camp last night. Arnold thinks they must have eloped, so he starts crying, but Hobbs mentions that they went to the forest, so he believes that they're planning to complete the mission. Arnold is happy hearing this, but Merlin gets upset and decides to head to the forest immediately. Arnold thinks it's because of his love for Alice, but he explains that he just wants the reward money from the mission. We see Bernard as he defeats the monsters guarding the tomb, and Alice is still following him, as he opens a hidden passage. He calls out to Ian, who appears before him, recognizing him as the strongest fighter of the Empire. He reveals that the prince brought him back to life, along with the other 4 heroes, and he tells Ian to help them restore the Empire. But he refuses, so Bernard tells him to give them the key they're looking for. Ian notes that the Empire fell because the king made a pact with the demons, and tells them not to repeat the same mistake, but Bernard decides to take the key by force. They start fighting, and they destroy everything around them, as Alice realizes she's in trouble, because the exit has been blocked. Meanwhile, Merlin easily cuts down the monsters in his path, but he realizes he's lost, so he thinks he'll never complete the mission. But he knows that bosses are always in the deepest part of the dungeon, so he smashes the ground to reach the next level. Carl and his men struggle against the monsters, so Cecilia uses her holy light to get rid of them, but the guardians suddenly appear, and they take out her knights in an instant. One of them charges at her, but Carl protects her with his body, telling her to run. But she refuses to leave him behind, and he starts fighting the guardians, as she prays for the protection of the goddess of light. Merlin suddenly appears, and she wonders how he came down from above, so he reveals that he took a shortcut, and she can't believe he was able to punch through the floor. She asks him to help them, but he tells her to get rid of her knights, because they're blocking the way. She tells him about her goal, but he doesn't care, and he easily takes out the guardians, telling her to cut her losses since her team has been wiped out. But she begs him to help her, and he asks her to pay him 66 trillion, but she tells him she doesn't have that much money, offering herself instead. But he explains he isn't interested in her, and notes that her previous offer was better, so he decides to help her for 10,000 gold. He pins her to the wall with Carl, telling them the undead won't be able to reach them there, and he promises to return after he claims the bounty. We return to Bernard, as Ian attacks him with his death beams, but he manages to dodge them, and he counters with his Tempest Slash. But Ian summons the Giant King, who punches him away, and Ian tells him he doesn't stand a chance, because he's fighting against two holy tier opponents. Merlin suddenly appears, and Alice is happy to see him, as he notes that he isn't too late, because Ian hasn't been defeated yet. He thinks Bernard ran off, because he wanted to claim the bounty for himself, and Ian attacks Merlin with his death beam, but he blocks it with just his hand. Ian can't believe it, and Bernard knows that Merlin is stronger than them, because he was able to punch through the floor. So they decide to gang up on him, but he easily blocks their attacks, and he wonders what Claude is doing. Alice thinks about helping Merlin, who notes that he doesn't want her to die, because even though she's dumb and weak, she's still helping him pay for his rent. She becomes angry hearing this, so she immediately changes her mind, but he attacks Ian and the Giant King with his sword, killing them in an instant. He takes the key, and Bernard promises to pay him 200,000 if he hands it over, but Alice stops him, telling him Bernard will use it to restore the previous empire. So he realizes that she knows about his plan, and he tries to kill her, but Merlin disarms him, telling him he can't let her die, because he's staying at her place. Bernard realizes he needs to defeat Merlin, so he uses his forbidden technique, which increases his strength by 100 times. He notes that he'll put everything on the line to defeat Merlin with his next attack, revealing that he's happy because he finally found an opponent worthy of his full strength. He creates copies of himself, and prepares to use his ultimate move, but Merlin instantly takes him out. He recognizes Merlin's sword, so he realizes he's the strongest demon in the world, and he fades away, as Merlin notes that he doesn't have a life force to drain. He thinks the key must be important, since he was willing to pay 200,000 for it, and Alice mentions that they should turn it over to the kingdom. But he notes that it could lead them to a treasure, telling her they won't be able to pay their debts with an honest living. They leave the tomb together, but we see that he forgot about Cecilia, so she starts crying as she calls for help. We see the other adventurers struggling against the undead, as Hobbs and Arnold wonder why their companions left them. They're about to be killed, but the monsters suddenly disappear, so Arnold thinks the undead mage has been defeated. They see Merlin with Alice, and he starts bragging about how he defeated the boss, but he realizes that everyone is praising Alice instead. They think she defeated the boss alone, so she tells them Merlin did all the work, but they don't believe her, because he's just an iron adventurer. We see Bella covering the incident in her report, and she interviews Alice, asking her how she defeated the boss. She explains that Merlin was the one who did it, but Bella thinks he just swooped in after Claude injured the boss, and Merlin is upset that nobody's giving him credit. So she tries to cheer him up, telling him he can have 70% of the reward from the mission. We see the other heroes with the prince, as Zoe and Joey mention that Bernard was useless, because he couldn't get the key to the gate of the abyss. Corona tells them they shouldn't talk about their fallen comrade like that, because he was extremely loyal to them, but they tell her his loyalty meant nothing, since he couldn't get the job done. They start to argue, but the prince stops them, telling them their secret has been exposed, so they need to act before the kingdom attacks them. He notes that they must summon the Hell Legion, and he orders Corona to get the key, so she promises to do her best to revive the empire. We see Merlin with Alice, and we see that he's happy about getting most of the reward. But Arnold notes that his team won the duel, so he'll be able to date Alice after he wins again. Hobbs is worried about the previous empire's comeback, but Arnold thinks the Bohemian Knights can defeat them, but Merlin has never heard of them. So Hobbs reveals that they're the kingdom's elite unit led by 12 holy tier warriors, who are known as the Thorn Paladins. Each of them is said to be as powerful as an entire army, and their captain is the strongest holy tier warrior in the world. We see Cecilia and Carl being rescued by the Bohemian Knights, and Carl can't believe they're getting involved, but Cecilia curses Merlin for ditching her. Merlin's group reaches the town, but they suddenly get attacked by a group of cloaked men, and they reveal that they want to fight Alice. So Merlin tells them to go ahead, and they start attacking her, as she wonders if they're from the previous empire. She uses her ice magic to fight back, and she manages to overpower them, but as she prepares to stab one of them, a magic shield suddenly blocks her attack. The man's disguise is blown away, and Arnold is surprised to see the emblem on his armor, realizing he's a Bohemian Knight. He introduces himself as Chapman, and reveals that he came there to investigate her, but he notes that his investigation is over, and he thanks her for cooperating. He thinks the report was exaggerated, because she's too weak to have defeated 2 holy tier opponents, so he believes the 4 heroes are nothing special. He notes that they don't need the Thorn Paladins to take care of them, but he suddenly feels someone scratch his neck, and he doesn't see anyone behind him, so he thinks he just imagined it. Merlin and Alice return to the guild, where Lou gives Alice her reward, but she notes that it's more than she expected. So Lou reveals that it includes Merlin's share, and she notes that their debts have been merged, because they're now a married couple, revealing that the guildmaster filed their paperwork for them. They both become upset, because they don't want to be married, and Arnold falls into despair, but Alice just kicks him away. They want to dissolve the marriage, but Lou tells them they need to register their marriage before they can file for a divorce. She adds that their debts have been consolidated, so even if they get divorced, their debts will be distributed equally. So Merlin realizes that millions have been added to his debt, and Alice laughs at him, telling him he deserves it since he ruined her life. They start living together, but they fight over who should sleep in the bed, and they agree to take turns doing the chores. Alice notes that Merlin will do the chores today, but he goes to sleep, so she reminds him about his responsibilities. But he doesn't seem to care, and she realizes he's useless. The next day, Alice tells Lou she can't stand living with Merlin because she did all the housework herself. She mentions that she wants to get divorced as soon as possible, and he notes that he'll be gone after they clear their debt, asking Lou about the fastest way to pay it off. So she tells him about triple S-rank quests, telling him he can earn millions by completing them, but Hobbs notes that they're extremely rare. He reveals that the adventurers worked together to defeat the Kraken last time, and Merlin thinks it's an easy way to make millions, so he asks Lou to give him a triple S-rank quest. But she tells him he needs to reach the mithril rank before he can accept the quest, telling him Alice is already in the gold rank, so she has a better chance to upgrade to mithril. But she knows that she needs to be a Saint Master to reach that rank, so he decides to train her, but he warns her that she might lose everything if she isn't careful. They begin her training, and Alice charges at Merlin, but he sends her flying, and mocks her for not being able to land a hit. She tries again, but she still fails to hit him, and she starts questioning his training methods, thinking he's just toying with her. He tells her not to blame him, telling her she lacks determination, and he explains that the fastest way to practice is to fight on the verge of death. So he threatens to kill her with his sword, telling her she'll die if she doesn't do her best, and she uses her ice spell to attack him, but he reminds her that he's immune to magic. She charges him with everything she's got, but he still manages to catch her, telling her she's too slow. So she goes even further, and surrounds him with ice thorns, before charging him with her full speed. But he catches her sword, telling her she still isn't fast enough, and he uses Vortex to attack her. So she defends herself with all her magic, and she manages to survive, but she collapses as she runs out of energy. But he realizes that she was able to cut his hand, wondering how her sword was able to hurt him, and Hobbs calls out to him, telling him there's a woman that's looking for him. He wonders who she is, but Hobbs invites him to hang out, and as they leave the training area, Corona sees them, realizing Merlin has the key to the abyss. Hobbs takes Merlin to a nightclub, telling him it's a man's paradise, and he shows him around, as Merlin notes that the style looks familiar. Hobbs introduces him to a woman named Helena, who seems to recognize him. Hobbs enjoys his time with Merlin, and a performer suddenly appears, but we see that it's Corona. She starts dancing in front of them, and Hobbs is stunned by her, but as she prepares to take the key, Merlin suddenly tells her she's boring. He explains that he doesn't like her, because she looks old, so she becomes angry and prepares to kill him. But Helena suddenly joins them, and she tells Merlin that someone's looking for him, so he leaves to check who it is. Helena opens a secret passage, and he wonders where she's taking him, but she suddenly removes her clothes, and reveals her true form. He realizes she's from the Dark Tribe, and she reveals that she's the Demon King of the Fourth Hall, but he wonders what she's doing there. The Demon General Asmodeus orders her to step back, and she tells Merlin he looks miserable. He wonders why she opened a nightclub there, so she explains that she's doing it to make money, reminding him about his store that sells demon scrolls. But he doesn't know what she's talking about, so she tells him his ignorance is the reason why he was fired. He wonders if the elders want him back, but she explains that the First Hall hasn't been performing well in his absence, telling him his store is losing money, and he needs to finish his backlog when he returns. She mentions that 10 billion has been added to his debt because of the First Hall's poor performance, but he notes that he'll never return to the demon realm since he's now happy with his life. She mocks him for being an iron adventurer, but he tells her it's temporary, asking her why she wanted to talk to him. So she mentions that she knows about the Hell Force activities on the continent, reminding him that he once killed their envoy. He recalls that the envoy kept pestering him while he was working, so he became annoyed and cut him into pieces. She tells Merlin to be careful, because the Hell Force is his enemy, but he notes that they're no match for him, since he can destroy their soul master with his sword. But she notes that she doesn't want that to happen, because he might end up destroying the whole world. After that, Helena tells Merlin that Hobbs has already gone home, and she notes that he'll receive a discount the next time he visits. He starts walking around the woods, but Corona suddenly appears behind him and tries to cut off his head. But her attack doesn't work, and he accidentally sends her flying, as he recalls that he left Alice unconscious. He realizes that he hit Corona, so he tells her to stop bothering him, and she can't believe how powerful he is, but she thinks he's still no match for her trump card. Alice suddenly attacks him, and she's angry because he left her behind, asking him where he's been. So he tells her he was just taking a walk, but she doesn't believe him, and he wonders why she's questioning him, telling her it has nothing to do with her. But she reminds him that they're married, so everyone will react if he's hooking up with other girls, telling him not to cause trouble for her. Meanwhile, we see Corona on a mountain as she uses her magic to free the Frost Holy Dragon, and she thinks Merlin won't stand a chance against it. Alice takes Merlin to the astrology tower, where all the guild's books are stored, and she tells him about a brilliant scholar who might be able to unlock the key's secrets. He explains that he doesn't trust the scholar, because she might take the treasure hidden in the key, but the scholar Caroline tells them she isn't interested in money. Her partner Rossetti mentions that Merlin is cute, and she congratulates Alice on her wedding, but she can't believe they got married, because she knows that Alice has a bad temper. She explains that she has nothing to do with him, so Rossetti starts flirting with him, but Alice tells her to stop, explaining that she needs to take responsibility for him since they're roommates. Caroline sees the key, and she mentions that it looks ancient, noting that it has an aura from the abyss. She asks Merlin what he knows about the mysterious forces from the abyss, so he explains that he encountered them, and asks her if he can use the key to find treasure. But she explains that she needs time to study the key, so Alice tells her to go ahead, and she drags him away. He thinks Caroline will take their treasure, but Alice notes that they can trust her, and she's confident that Rossetti will deal with whoever wants to steal it. But Caroline is worried, because the key has an ominous aura, so she believes that it will unlock something terrible. Merlin writes a letter to Lilith, telling her he has become a successful adventurer, but he suddenly feels an excruciating pain as he realizes that it's because of his curse. So he heads to the guild, where he looks at the quests available, but he realizes that they're all boring. He tells Alice he wants to defeat Holy Tier opponents, and she starts arguing with him, but Lou mentions that she just received a designated commission for them. She explains that a client picked them to take on the quest, so Alice reads it, realizing that a village called Lokal was attacked by the Frost Holy Dragon, and the client needs them to defeat it. She knows that it's one of the 6 holy dragons, and it's said to have enough magic power to destroy a kingdom, so Lou thinks they can't defeat it. Merlin starts shaking, so Alice wonders if he's afraid of the dragon, but he's actually excited, because he could extend his lifespan for half a year if he defeats it. So he carries her away, and tells her they should defeat the dragon together. Meanwhile, Corona tries to speak the dragon's tongue, but he tells her to be silent, because he can talk to humans using their language. He explains that he doesn't care about humans, but he needs to help her since she unsealed him, and he's angry that she ordered him to threaten the villagers in Lokal, since it isn't a task fit for a dragon. She explains that their enemies are formidable, so they need to plan carefully, and he thinks they're nothing compared to him. But she tells him not to let his guard down, because Merlin defeated the light dragon. He thinks it's impossible, and explains that even a demon king can't defeat the light dragon, because it has absolute power over dark creatures. So she notes that it's just a rumor she heard, but he wants to meet Merlin himself, because he wants to see what he's made of. She mentions that her trap is ready, and disguises herself as a girl, explaining that she'll head to the village, so that she can lure Merlin to the mountain. Merlin and Alice make their way to the village, and Alice is freezing because of the winter, but Merlin isn't bothered at all, telling her they might miss their chance if they slow down. They reach the village, but she wonders why it's colder there, so he tells her it's because of the giant iceberg. He realizes that the dragon is behind it, but he thinks it must be weak because it didn't freeze the entire mountain range. Corona suddenly approaches them and introduces herself as Annie, telling them she's the daughter of the chief, so Alice realizes that she's their client. Merlin wonders why she seems like an old lady, so she becomes nervous, but Alice tells him to be nice to her. She notes that the dragon attacked their village and demanded that they sacrifice young girls for it to eat, explaining that she'll be sacrificed tomorrow. Merlin doesn't believe her, because he knows that dragons don't like to eat humans, but Alice tells her they'll take care of the dragon. We see the villagers trying to break the iceberg, when Corona talks to the chief, telling him the adventurers from the guild have arrived. But he tells them to go back, because he thinks they're no match for the dragon, telling them it was able to create the iceberg just by snorting. But Merlin laughs, so the villagers are upset, thinking he isn't taking the situation seriously. He approaches the iceberg, and everyone thinks he'll destroy it with his burning fist, but he just touches it, so they think he's messing around. But it suddenly shatters, and everyone can't believe how powerful he is. That evening, the villagers give Merlin food, and they think they're saved, because he's an incredible adventurer. He starts gobbling up the food, and the chief apologizes for underestimating him, but Alice knows that he asked them to leave since he didn't want them to get hurt. He mentions that he doesn't know how much he should give them as a reward, and she notes that Annie filed the commission, but he explains that she doesn't even know how to write. She invites Alice and Merlin to the hot spring, and they take a bath together, as she goes over their stuff, but she can't find the key, so she thinks it's time for Plan B. Merlin approaches Alice, and she tells him to stay back, thinking he wants to see her body, but he explains that he isn't interested. He tells her they might find a dragon core, which she can use to level up, explaining that she'll gain the dragon's powers if she eats it. He mentions that it's an ultra-rare treasure, so she wonders why he's letting her have it, and thinks it must be because he likes her. But he explains that he just wants her to level up, so that she can start accepting triple S-rank commissions for him. She tells him not to fall in love with her, because her heart already belongs to the Nightblade, so he tells her he's the one the people call by that name. But she punches him away, and tells him to stop insulting her idol, because he's nothing compared to him. She continues to hit Merlin, who explains that he's telling the truth, but she doesn't believe him, and he tells her the Nightblade will never marry her because of her attitude. She curses him to be single for life, but he suddenly collapses because of his curse, so she wonders what happened to him. She carries him to the village, but she sees that the dragon has arrived, and he's impressed that they were able to destroy the iceberg, realizing they're the adventurers Corona told him about. The villagers start to panic, because Merlin is still unconscious, so Alice tells the chief to take everyone to the cellar, as she prepares to fight the dragon. The villagers escape with Merlin, while she unleashes her most powerful ice spell, but it has no effect, and she realizes that she's no match for the dragon. He attacks her with his ice breath, and she thinks it's all over for her, but Merlin suddenly arrives to save her. He mentions that he feels better now, and he tells the dragon he's glad to see him, asking him why he didn't show up earlier. But he tells Merlin to stop touching him, and wonders if he's insane, because he isn't afraid of a holy dragon. He prepares to use his sword, but Alice stops him, telling him he might destroy the village, and he realizes that he needs to leave the area. He tries to play fetch with the dragon, so he becomes angry, telling Merlin he isn't a dog, and he tries to crush him, but Merlin stops his attack and jumps away with him. They start fighting in the mountains, and Merlin is happy to see that the dragon is powerful, telling him to bring it on, because the healing effect is greater if he defeats a stronger opponent. The dragon unleashes his ice breath, but it has no effect, and Merlin explains that he's immune to magic, revealing that he's a demon king. The dragon thinks he killed the light dragon, but he explains that he would never kill him because he turned him into his pet. The dragon doesn't believe his story, and he's angry that Merlin is mocking the honor of holy dragons, but Merlin is just happy that his opponent is getting stronger. Meanwhile, Corona hugs Alice, who wonders why she didn't hide with the others, but Corona suddenly tries to stab her. Alice blocks her attack and asks her who she is, so she reveals her true identity, explaining that she's there to take back the key. Alice claims to know nothing about it, but Corona decides to capture her so that she can interrogate her. Corona uses her death trap to block Alice's senses while she attacks her, but Alice manages to hit her, telling her she's nothing compared to Merlin. But she immediately regenerates, so Alice realizes she's undead, and Zoe joins them, telling Corona she's a disgrace to the four heroes. So she starts fighting seriously, and kicks Alice away, telling her it's strange that Merlin wasn't tempted when she danced in front of him, but he seems to be attracted to Alice. She can't accept that Alice is prettier than her, so she prepares to beat her up, but Zoe mentions that Alice is an important hostage. So Corona tells him to take her back, and notes that she still needs to defeat Merlin. She heads to the mountain, where she sees Merlin fighting the dragon, who appears to be losing. Merlin prepares to finish him off, but his curse suddenly bothers him once again, and Corona kicks him away. She tells the dragon they should work together, but he pushes her away, telling her not to interfere. Merlin gets back up, and the dragon tries to crush him with his ice spell, but Merlin destroys it with his sword, and his attack cuts through the dragon. He can't believe how powerful Merlin is, and he crashes to the ground, as Merlin notes that he was able to drain his life force, so his curse shouldn't bother him for 6 months. But Corona suddenly takes the dragon's core, and she eats it, allowing her to absorb its powers. Her body transforms, and she thinks she has become the most powerful being in the world, telling Merlin she'll make him suffer for insulting her. But he reminds her that he was able to one-shot the frost dragon, and notes that she just absorbed its power, so he wonders what makes her think she's stronger than him. She explains that she has surpassed the frost dragon, because her holy tear techniques have combined with its power, and she starts attacking him, but he easily defends himself. She uses her skill to restrain him, but he casually breaks free and throws her away, telling her she's still nothing compared to him. She's angry hearing this, and tells him not to get cocky, because he still hasn't seen the dragon's ultimate move. She chants in the dragon's tongue, and unleashes her ultimate move, which freezes everything in the area. But she realizes that it didn't freeze Merlin, who notes that he's catching a cold because of the temperature, so she starts to lose it. He tells her he has no time for her, but she tells him to look behind him, and he realizes that the entire village is frozen. She thinks Alice and the villagers are dead, but he becomes angry hearing this, because she just killed his roommate. She admits that she can't defeat him yet, promising to fight him again after she fully absorbs the dragon's core, and she flies away. But he immediately catches up to her, and cuts her with his sword, killing her in an instant. He looks at the village, and thinks he can still save Alice, because she was only just frozen. But we see Zoe as he breaks out of the ice, and he sees an explosion on the mountain, so he realizes that there's a powerful warrior there, and he notes that he wants to fight him. But he knows that he needs to complete his mission first, so he opens a portal, but as he prepares to leave with Alice, he suddenly gets stuck, and he realizes that Merlin is behind him. He asks Zoe where he's taking his roommate, and he attacks him with his sword, cutting off his arm. He realizes that the 4 heroes are after the key, so he needs to defeat them, but he knows that they're undead, so he can't absorb their life force after he takes them out. He wonders if he should rescue Alice, and realizes that the ice is disappearing, so the villagers should be okay. Zoe takes Alice to the prince, and tells him Corona was defeated along with the frost dragon, so the prince realizes that the person who took the key is OP. He asks Zoe if he was able to get the key back, but he answers no, so the prince thinks he's useless, telling him they have no time left to waste. But Zoe tells him to calm down, because he was able to capture Alice, so they just need to wait for Merlin to come for her. Alice wakes up in the dungeon, and she's surprised to see an elf, but Joey suddenly joins them in their cell, so the elf starts to panic, thinking he'll hurt her. Alice stabs him from behind, but it has no effect, and he slams her against the wall, before summoning his massive sword. We see a man on the mountain, where he sees the frost dragon's remains, and he celebrates, because he knows that he can use its blood to create a powerful army, which will impress Asmodeus. We return to Joey, as he cuts the elf's arm, and starts collecting her blood, so Alice wonders why he's so cruel. But he explains that he's just following his brother's orders, because he'll get punished if he disobeys him. He mentions that he has done plenty of horrible things, but he thinks they were all his brother's fault, so Alice realizes that he's insane. After he leaves, Alice introduces herself to the elf, who reveals that her name is Shirley, and she mentions that she snuck out of her house to have fun. But she ended up getting captured, and Alice wonders why Joey collected her blood, so she explains that the prince needs to drink elf blood to stay alive. She notes that when she arrived in the dungeon, she saw the corpse of the last elf who had his blood drained, and she doesn't want to end up like him. So Alice assures her that someone will rescue them, and she wonders who's coming to save them, so Alice mentions that it's someone important to her. We see Rossetti as she tries to wake Caroline up, because she spaced out while she was looking into the key, and Merlin suddenly arrives, telling her he needs to borrow it. But Rossetti tells him what happened, so he flicks her head to wake her up, but she crashes into the wall. She finally wakes up, and notes that the key came from the abyss, so they need to turn it over to the royal family, and let the Balhenia Knights handle it. But Merlin explains that Alice was captured, and he needs to exchange the key to save her, so Caroline warns him that thousands of people could lose their lives if it falls into the wrong hands. But he explains that he needs it to save Alice, and Caroline thinks it's because he loves her, but we learn that he just needs her to repay his debt. Caroline returns the key, and he tells her not to worry, because he can defeat the Hell Legion alone, but he doesn't know where he can trade the key for Alice. Arnold suddenly arrives with Hobbs, and they know what happened to Alice, so they tell Merlin they've already tracked her location. Hobbs tells him not to underestimate their networks, and shows him where he can find the enemy's stronghold, but notes that the Balhenia Knights are already on their way. Arnold adds that he promises to pay 1 million to the Holy Tier warrior who saves Alice, but Merlin runs off, because he's too stressed to think about making money. We see the Balhenia Knights with their leader Sahaddin, and Chapman tells him they don't need him there, because their enemies are weak. But he explains that the Queen ordered him to secure a decisive victory, and suppress the popularity of Nightblade, because he has become a threat to their authority. Sahaddin explains that the commoners see him as their savior, but the knights represent the crown, and the people are supposed to look up to them instead of Nightblade. He adds that the Elf King's daughter Shirley was kidnapped a year ago, and he thinks they might find her in the stronghold. But Zoe suddenly attacks them, so Sahaddin protects his men, and calls Zoe a coward for launching a sneak attack. He charges in, but Sahaddin blocks his attacks and pushes him back, so Zoe realizes that he's a worthy opponent. He uses his 10 shadows technique, and Sahaddin tells his men to be careful, because each shadow is as powerful as Zoe. The shadows start cutting down the knights, and Zoe mocks them for being weak, but Sahaddin suddenly appears above him and uses his special move to attack. We return to Merlin, as he realizes that he's lost, but he sees a massive explosion, so he decides to go there, thinking he might find someone who can give him directions. Sahaddin walks away, thinking he has defeated Zoe, but he gets back up, and Sahaddin can't believe he's still alive. He calls Joey, who gives him his sword, and he notes that they can only unleash their true power when they're together. They use their fusion technique, and Zoe mentions that no one has ever survived it, so Sahaddin decides to go all out and show them his iron body, revealing that no one can hurt him while it's active. The brothers attack him with their ultimate move, and Sahaddin protects his men, but his barrier shatters, and a massive explosion wipes them out. Zoe laughs at them and notes that he enjoys killing weaklings, but he realizes that Chapman is still alive, so he orders Joey to torture him. But Merlin suddenly arrives, and he knows that Zoe took Alice, so he prepares to take him on. Zoe mentions that he'll torture Merlin until he can't make a sound, but he tells Zoe he needs to see a doctor since he's crazy, so he becomes angry, telling him they just wiped out the knights. He asks them about Alice, so Zoe mentions that she's in the temple behind them, but he thinks Merlin will never reach her, and the brothers use their fusion technique. They attack Merlin with their ultimate move, but he uses his sword to easily cut through it, and they fall to the ground. Zoe thinks he lost because of Joey, but Merlin mentions that he's the real deadweight, because Joey is stronger than him. He orders Joey to kill Merlin, who wonders why Joey is taking orders from Zoe, and he suddenly stabs him, telling him he's wanted to do that for a long time, because he's addicted to torturing others. He continues to torture him, explaining that he doesn't need him to use their ultimate technique, and he uses it to eliminate him. He thinks he's stronger without Zoe, but Merlin uses his sword to get rid of him, and prepares to head to the temple to rescue Alice. But Chapman asks him if he's the Nightblade, and he knows that he's a wanted man, so he thinks about getting rid of Chapman. But he reveals that he's a huge fan, and he asks for Merlin's autograph, telling him he's always wanted to meet him. He wants to shake Merlin's hand, but he explains that he's in a hurry, and runs to the temple. Meanwhile, Alice helps Shirley escape the dungeon, and she takes down the guards in their path. But they see the prince with his army, and he tells them he won't let them get away, because he needs them to get the key from Merlin. Alice cuts through his soldiers, and uses her ice spell to obliterate them, telling him to give up on his pointless dream of restoring his empire. He explains that he was a prince for 69 years, waiting for his father to die, but the empire fell just as he was about to take over. He tells her about his struggles during the past 400 years, and she gets bored listening to him, realizing he's the unluckiest villain ever. But she notes that countless people will lose their lives because of his ambition, so she's determined to stop him. He uses his magic to resurrect his minions, and explains that they'll keep rising again because of their soul flames, ordering them to capture her. She tries to fight them off, but gets overwhelmed, so she starts using her magic to defend herself. But she runs out of mana, so she thinks it's all over for her, and the prince tells her to give up, but Merlin suddenly joins the fight, and he hopes he isn't late for the party. She scolds him for being late, and they start arguing with each other, but the prince interrupts them, telling them they can't defeat his undead army. But Merlin instantly wipes them out, and tells her to take care of the prince. So she charges in, and he tries to stop her with his magic, but she breaks through his barrier, so he realizes that she isn't using an ordinary sword. She uses her special move to knock him down, and tells him she'll hand him over to the royal family, but he tells her the fight isn't over yet, and uses his magic to restrain Shirley. While Alice is distracted, the prince poisons her and takes her hostage, threatening to kill her if Merlin doesn't give him the key. He knows that it will open the gate of the abyss, and the prince explains that his goal is to obtain absolute power to rule the world, so she tells Merlin not to give him the key. But he drops it anyway, and the prince takes it, so she's angry at Merlin, telling him countless people will lose their lives because of him. But he reminds her that he's a demon king, so he doesn't care if the world is destroyed, and explains that he just wants to find a worthy opponent for him to kill. He suddenly kisses her, and the poison disappears, but she knocks him down because she thinks he's taking advantage of her. He explains that he just kissed her because his saliva can detoxify her, but she tells him to rescue Shirley, so he destroys the tentacle that's restraining her. The prince uses the key to open the gate of the abyss, and a miasma surrounds the area, as Merlin notes that it smells like death. The prince summons the Hell Legion, and mentions that a new era has begun, because he's about to take over the world. Alice sees the undead creatures, and notes that even if all the armies in the kingdom banded together, they still wouldn't stand a chance. But Merlin prepares to fight the Hell Legion, thinking he'll enjoy fighting them with his full strength. The prince summons a giant wave of undead creatures, but Merlin unleashes his full power, and creates a pillar of fire, which causes the prince to panic. The flames cover the area, and Merlin unleashes a devastating attack, which destroys all of the monsters and clears the sky. The gate disappears, and he mocks the Hell Legion as he tries to act cool, but we learn that he's sad, because they were all undead creatures, so he wasn't able to absorb their life force. The prince starts crying, because he knows that he can't restore his empire, and he asks Merlin who he is. So he explains that he's just an ordinary adventurer, who just happened to be born with extraordinary powers. The prince wonders why he has no ambition, telling him he can use his powers to take the throne and rule the world. But he notes that he isn't interested, and tells the prince about his experience as a demon king, explaining that he did nothing but work, but his elders still thought he was incompetent. He mentions that he wasn't able to enjoy his life, so he gave in to his laziness, and decided to live as an ordinary adventurer. The prince notes that he finally understands why he failed, thinking it's because Merlin is a god, and he suddenly runs away, as Alice realizes that he has lost his mind. After that, Alice asks Merlin why he spared the prince, because she thinks he needs to be punished, so Merlin explains that he doesn't care, telling her he only went there to have fun. Shirley wakes up, and she doesn't know what happened, because the miasma caused her to pass out, so he tells her he defeated the Hell Legion. She thinks he's Alice's lover, so she tells Shirley that it isn't the case, but the carriage suddenly stops, and their friends welcome them back. They celebrate Alice's return, and we learn that the Bohemian Knights took credit for taking down the prince, but Merlin doesn't care, and Rossetti starts flirting with him again. So Alice tells her to leave him alone, and Shirley mentions that she needs them to take her home. But Merlin reminds her that he's an adventurer, so he needs to be rewarded for taking on her quest, and she promises to pay him with her pocket money. He thinks it isn't worth much, but she mentions that she has 10 million gold, so he promises to do his best for her. Lou mentions that they received another designated commission, and Cecilia suddenly appears, telling Merlin to go with her. Alice notes that they need to take Shirley home first, but he thinks they can take on 2 quests at the same time, and Alice complains because she knows he's planning to make her do all of the work. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.